Hey, welcome back, podcast friends, to another episode. And today, what I want to talk to you about is what an A1C laboratory test is. And this is very important to me because I truly want the listeners of my podcast to become very educated. I want them to be the most educated of the other people out there, the people who suffer with obesity, the people who suffer with type 2 diabetes. And this is no little thing. And everybody who is obese or has type 2 diabetes or goes to the doctor is going to know what an A1C is, but that's all they know is it's an A1C that kind of tests your blood glucose. So I want to go more in depth. And I promise I'm going to try and make this not very technical, but I do want you to understand. And the reason why is because this is a huge problem, especially here in the United States. So if you take the top 200 countries and you look at the obesity rates of the top 200, with number one being the most obese and number 200 being the least obese, of those, the United States ranks 10. That means there's 190 other countries who are less obese than we are. And this is horrible. This equates to 41.6% of our population is considered clinically obese. Okay. 41.64. Now, just for comparison, let's compare that to, say, China. China is ranked 149th because only 8.94% of their population is obese. Remember, ours is 41.6%. And then when you look at Japan, Japan is all the way down to 161. They only have an obesity rate of 7.63%. So here in America, we are extremely obese. And when you look at the type 2 diabetes rates, it's the exact same thing. Basically, it's the same thing. We are one of the worst countries in the entire world for obesity and type 2 diabetes. And there is a reason for that. There's a huge reason for this. And I'll kind of allude to that later, but I've talked about this in almost all my podcasts. Actually, I'll just tell you now. One of them is because of our man-made food. All the man-made food that you get at the grocery stores lead directly to obesity and direct type 2 diabetes because it's all made out of the same three ingredients: ultra processed carbohydrates, sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and vegetable and seed oils. Those three products are on everything and they are killing us. They're increasing our insulin resistance. They're causing inflammation all throughout our bodies. And remember, type 2 diabetes is not a problem of high blood glucose. That is a symptom of the underlying problem. The actual problem is insulin resistance. That's what's causing it. And you get insulin resistance by a lot of different things, but the things that you can control is what you put in your mouth, because the more carbohydrates you eat, the more glucose you're putting in your body, the higher insulin levels go, and the more insulin resistance you get. So anyway, I've talked about that so many times. I just want to reiterate if there's anybody who hasn't listened to some of these other podcasts. So anyway, that's why I want to make sure. And since we have such a huge population of obesity and type 2 diabetes, I want you to know exactly what the A1C level is, because this is one of the things that we use to determine whether you're diabetic or not. Now, first, there's other names for the A1C. There's hemoglobin A1C, there's glycated hemoglobin, and glycohemoglobin. Glycated hemoglobin just means that a glucose molecule has attached itself to whatever it is. Anything that has a glucose molecule attached to it, it's considered glycated. And that's what the A1C is going to be. So just so you know, what the A1C does is it's going to test your average blood glucose over the last 3 to 4 months. And the reason why it's the last 3 to 4 months is because this is the normal life cycle of a red blood cell. From the time it's produced until it's destroyed is around 3 to 4 months. And glucose attaches to the red blood cell on the hemoglobin portion. And I'll explain that also. So what this is, that's why it's the last 3 to 4 months. And really it's closer to just the last month, because red blood cells are constantly being born and being destroyed. So really it's more indicative of your last month's glucose than it is over the last 3 to 4 months. But what red blood cells do is red blood cells carry oxygen in their hemoglobin. They carry that to your cells. And then every single cell in your body is going through metabolic processes. It's always producing either ATP or something. There's always chemical reactions, and they need oxygen to perform these chemical reactions. And then the byproduct, the waste product, is carbon dioxide. So the red blood cells bring oxygen to the cells, drop the oxygen off, and then pick up the carbon dioxide and bring it back to the lungs to be exhaled through your lungs. And think of it kind of like a dump truck or a garbage truck. In a way, maybe not. Okay. Now the way this does this is the red blood cells, they have what's called hemoglobin. There's four little proteins called hemoglobin, and it makes like a cage inside the red blood cell. And inside this cage is your iron. So you have iron wrapped in this cage of this hemoglobins wrapped in the cage, and that's in the red blood cell. And what happens is this, whether this is going to have oxygen or whether it's going to do carbon dioxide, all depends on the pH of the environment of where you are. So what happens is when you are up in the lungs, you inhale oxygen, so you have a lot of oxygen. On the pH range, it stands for potential hydrogen. Okay, this tells you how much hydrogen you have on board. And the pH range goes from 1 to 14. And the lower ranges, that's called acidic. So if it's like from 1 to 7, that's an acidic environment. Okay, very strong acid. If it's higher from 7 to 14, that's called basic. Okay, that's your base. And a very strong acid of 1 is a very strong acid. It could eat right through anything. However, a very strong base, like a pH of 14, is also extremely corrosive and can eat through anything. So whether you're a high acid or high base, both of them are very extremely corrosive. So what happens is in a basic environment, it changes your hemoglobin, or the iron in your hemoglobin. It changes it basically, and it makes it allows oxygen to stick to it. Okay, so that's what happens in the lungs. You have oxygen in the lungs, and this is very basic. So the oxygen sticks to it. Then the red blood cell goes all the way through your bloodstream, and it gets down to your cells. And now in the cells where you have all these metabolic processes, you're producing a lot of carbon dioxide. So with all this carbon dioxide being produced, that makes the environment acidic. So since it's acidic, the oxygen comes off and the carbon dioxide attaches to the hemoglobin, and that gets carried all the way back to the lungs. And now you're back in a basic environment. So it releases carbon dioxide and it picks up more oxygen, and it starts this whole cycle again. Okay. So that's important. That's how you get oxygen, carbon dioxide going around in your bloodstream. But what ends up happening is when you're doing this, there's two different kinds of hemoglobin. There is A for adult, and there's actually several different types of hemoglobin. There's A, B, S, C, F, different ones. But I'll just talk about A and F. A is the adult hemoglobin. Adult hemoglobin, the difference between the two, well, fetal hemoglobin is the type of hemoglobin that you have inside your body when you're in utero, when your mother is pregnant with you. Okay. So when you're pregnant, the baby has fetal hemoglobin, and fetal hemoglobin attaches oxygen to it a lot stronger than adult hemoglobin. And the reason for this, if you're a mother who's pregnant, okay, and so you inhale oxygen, so you have a high concentration of oxygen in the lungs, just like we talked about. The oxygen gets dispersed through your bloodstream, your blood cells all over your body. So as it goes to all the cells in your body, the amount of oxygen decreases. Well, when it gets down to the placenta, it's a lower amount of oxygen than what you had in the lungs. And since babies get all their oxygen through the placenta, they need a lot stronger hemoglobin to be able to get that oxygen out of the blood and be able to use it. And this maintains all the way till the baby's born. And your fetal hemoglobin kind of starts deteriorating about 6 months of age. And after 6 months, it's almost all adult hemoglobin. So you have about 98% of your hemoglobin is going to be adult hemoglobin. And so that's the main difference between the fetal and the adult. But what happens with this pH? And again, the pH is what determines how much oxygen is going to be on there. But what happens is in the molecule, you have hemoglobin A, which stands for adult. And then there's two different types. There's like hemoglobin A1 and there's hemoglobin A2. I won't tell you the difference of them, but just know that A1 is about 98% of the hemoglobin you're going to have. So it's hemoglobin. I just told you that. That's like the little protein cage that holds the iron inside your red blood cell. Hemoglobin A means that's the adult. And hemoglobin A1, that's the most common types of hemoglobin that we have in us. But of this, you have hemoglobin A1 or A1A, A1B, A1C. And so these are all also little subtypes of the hemoglobin. And what happens is glucose attaches to the A1C portion of your hemoglobin. And the higher your concentration goes up, the more glucose attaches to this A1C portion of your hemoglobin of your red blood cells. And what happens is as it attaches, so the red blood cell, it lives for 3 to 4 months, and the whole time it's living, more and more glucose is attaching to this 1C portion. And they found that there's actually a correlation between the amount of glucose that attaches to the 1C portion of your hemoglobin and your average blood glucose that you've been having for the last 3 to 4 months. And again, 3 to 4 months is because that's the lifespan of a red blood cell. And so when you're looking at A1C, you need more information than just an A1C, because anything that affects your red blood cells will also affect your A1C, just like you would think. So if you have low iron or high iron, if you have different iron levels, that's going to affect the amount of red blood cells you have, and that's going to affect how much glucose can attach to them. So iron levels, sickle cell anemia, pregnancy, kidney disease, liver disease, problems with your spleen, cystic fibrosis. There's so many things that can occur in your body that affects your red blood cells, either production or destruction. And all of these can also affect your A1C. So you never want to just use a regular A1C and that's all to be able to determine this. However, there is, again, A1C. Some people like to use A1Cs and some people like better the your glucose concentrations. And this is called an EAG. It's the estimated average glucose. And there are a lot of calculators online. If you just go to a computer and just type in something like A1C to estimated average glucose or anything like that, and they'll show you key in any kind of A1C and it'll tell you what your average glucose has been over that time period. And this is really important because our body, naturally, the way our body's always been, our body knows what glucose levels are going to start being damaged, and it doesn't want that. And our normal body automatically spills glucose into our urine when our levels get to be around 150 to 180 milligrams per deciliter. It's always been that way. So our body knows that it doesn't really want levels above that. And when you do have levels above that, for a little bit, that's fine. It'll spill over in the kidneys and go away. But if you continue to eat man-made food that has all this glucose in it, because it's all nothing but carbohydrates and glucose and sugar, when you keep doing that and you keep your concentrations high for long periods of time, this starts causing damage to all of your body, all the cells in your body. So you do not want a high blood glucose. However, that brings up, what is a good glucose? Because back before 2001, it was known that an excellent blood glucose was going to be less than 6%. If you were less than 6% on your A1C, that was excellent. And if you were in the good range, that was an A1C of 7 to 8%. That's a good range. And that 7 to 8%, that's 150 to 180 milligrams per deciliter. So that 7 to 8% is what your body normally knows that it doesn't really want a high glucose above that. So when it starts getting above that, your body's going to automatically start secreting glucose through your kidneys. Okay. That was an A1C of 7 to 8. That one's good. But if it gets above that, when it starts getting above 9, this is when you really have trouble and you're going to start spilling in the urine. And this is also when you're going to start having a lot of tissue damage. However, in 2001, that was before 2001. After 2009, now they've changed and they said an excellent A1C is less than 5.7. Okay, that's fine. But then they came up with this term saying that your be careful range is when it's 5.7% to 6.4. So this is saying that after 2009, before 2009, if you were in that 7 to 8 range, then you are good, and less than 7, you're excellent. Now they're saying if you're 5.7 to 6.4, which before you're pretty much in the excellent range, now they're saying, oh, this is pre-diabetes. You got to really be careful. And if you get above 6.4, now you have diabetes. Okay. What changed? Nothing. Nothing. Our bodies are the same. Our bodies have always been, except for all the inflammation and glucose and insulin resistance that we have because of drug companies and food companies. However, our bodies are the same. The only thing that changed is the people who make diabetic medications lowered the range so they can get more people taking their diabetic drugs. And remember, diabetic drugs in general, the way they work is they cause you to raise your insulin levels to get your blood glucose down. And like I said at the beginning, diabetes is not a problem of high glucose. That is a symptom. It's a problem of high insulin being too long and causing insulin resistance. So when you take a diabetic medication that lowers your glucose, but it raises your insulin, you're making diabetes worse. So by lowering the A1C range down, what they've done is they're starting more people who are normally, they were considered healthy and normal. Now they're saying they're sick and they need to start them on a pre-diabetic medication, a diabetic medication, knowing that once they start on the diabetic medication, it's going to cause their diabetes to be worse, and they're going to have to continue to increase the dose or increase the number of diabetic medications that they put everybody on. And since they have everybody focusing just on blood glucose and not on their insulin levels, everybody thinks this is great. Oh, that's great. My sugar's coming down, but they don't realize that they're getting worse and worse and worse. And this is what I want my people to understand. Okay. So if you want to know all about that, I actually just talked about this in my last podcast in episode number 69 on why and when did we start using the term pre-diabetes. But for this, I'm just going to recap everything I've just said. I'm just going to recap it. So the question was, what is an A1C laboratory test? An actual A1C is actually called a hemoglobin A1C. And it's called hemoglobin A1C. And again, this is just a recap, because hemoglobin, that makes up, that's four little globin chains that make a cage inside your red blood cells that holds iron. That is what the hemoglobin is. The A stands for adult. A1 is the most common adult hemoglobin we have, and the 1C portion is where glucose attaches. So if you can measure the amount of glucose on that A1C, that'll tell you about how much your average glucose has been. But be very careful. Know that an A1C that's less than 8, you're still fine. You do not need to be on diabetic medications. In fact, you do need to bring glucose down. If you're ever on diabetic medication, please, if you are that far into it, you've got to realize that that's caused by carbohydrates. You always should avoid man-made carbohydrate, all man-made food. Okay, that's horrible. But even God-made food, if you have an extremely high blood glucose level, you might even think about decreasing your fruits and your vegetables also, which really should just be used as condiments. You should have a plate of nothing but red meat, fat, or any meat, animal-based meat, God-made meat. Have a good protein, and then just use your fruits and vegetables just as condiments. So you just have a little bit every now and then. But even those get turned into carbohydrates, which gets turned into glucose in your body. So depending on how bad your health is, you may want to just avoid carbohydrates altogether. So don't let your numbers scare you into depression. Just let your numbers be something that's going to excite you and help get you on track and motivate you to start eating healthy. Because type 2 diabetes has always been a disease of nutrition. And the only way you can fix it is nutrition. Drugs do not cure type 2 diabetes. They don't do it. So therefore, the drug company and the food companies want to tell you that type 2 diabetes is chronic and cannot be reversed, can't be stopped, can't be prevented. It's a lie. You're being lied to, because if you change your nutrition, you stay away from carbohydrates, you eat all God-made food, and specifically the God-made proteins, which is eggs, turkey, you know, rib, beef, anything. I mean, any meat. You know what your meats are. Those are fine. Stick with those. Stay away from carbohydrates, and you watch your insulin resistance will improve, and your glucoses will go down, and you will start feeling much better. And even fatty liver disease, you can even start reversing fatty liver disease if you just have fatty liver disease, if it's non-alcoholic, because that's what stores the fat, is all this excess carbohydrates. So anyway, I know I'm rambling. I just want you to know that's what the hemoglobin A1C is. Yes, our A1C rates have changed since 2001 to 2009. That's when they were really manipulating things. But that isn't because of health. That's because of drug cells and food cells. So don't be scared. Be motivated. Please think of every single thing you eat as nutrients for your body. And if you're eating man-made things in a box, bottle, bag, or can, all this stuff in the center aisles of your grocery stores, there are zero nutrients in that. There are many toxins, vegetable and seed oils, sugar, and ultra-processed carbohydrates, besides all the other chemicals that go on there. So avoid that. Stick with God-made food. And I hope this educated you a little bit more. I really do want my listeners to be more educated than the majority of our obese patients, our type 2 diabetics, and know what the A1C is. So I'll quit right there. I hope this helped, and I will see you or talk to you on the next podcast. So thank you so much once again for listening. Have a great week. And remember, make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.